Let's now take you back to one of our top stories where the Russia-Ukraine conflict has completed 3 years, but the quest to bring peace to the region is adding to uncertainties. Joining us to talk about it is Lieutenant General retired Sanjay Kulkarni and former Director General Infantry. Also we have Ashok Sajjanhar, former senior diplomat. Good evening to you both. If I could come to you, Ambassador Sajjanhar, and ask you about what is going on when 3 years have been completed, but you have all the European leaders and Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, also in Kyiv, but Donald Trump has been silent for most of the day.
Yeah, you're very right, Gautam, and thank you for having me. So I think two data points basically. I think what Vladimir Putin really started with, have a regime change in Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. He's not been able to achieve that. It's been 3 years, he's been fighting, there's been a lot of death, damage, destruction in Ukraine. He's not been able to achieve that. Second data point, right within the first week, leaders of the United Kingdom, USA, they promised asylum to Zelensky because they thought that Zelensky will not be able to fight on, he will not be able to survive, he'll not be able to continue. That is what the world thought. He still is there and he's continuing the fight. That having been said, I think after a little less than 3 years, we've had the first meeting and the first real signs of, possibility of a ceasefire when we had the meeting of the Russian foreign minister and the Secretary of State of the United States. But of course, it appears very uncertain. You can see on your, what you're showing on your, the images that you're showing on the screens, that there are more than 10 leaders of the European Union who are visiting Ukraine. There is also the Prime Minister of Canada who is there. But as far as Donald Trump is concerned, he is really cut himself off from NATO or from any sort of support to Ukraine. In fact, he has used very, very uncharitable remarks for the president of Ukraine. So I think it is all up in the air, but it does appear that it is moving slowly, gradually towards some sort of a ceasefire, because there are discussions on, this minerals deal, rare earth minerals deal between Ukraine and the United States. And I think if that, there is agreement on that, maybe the Americans will put their force behind it, try to accommodate some of the concerns of Europe and Ukraine, and also concerns of Russia as far as territory that they have occupied, and also not allowing membership of NATO to Ukraine. And there could be sort of, some area of convergence.
Okay, and there are indications that there is some deal being worked out as well, because that's what Zelensky said in that G7 call that has happened. Ukraine and the US are working productively on an economic deal at the center of an effort to end Russia's war in Ukraine. That's what President Zelensky said. General Kulkarni, before I ask you about what's really happening, just tell us about from the perspective of a former defense officer, a general, how has the notion of warfare changed because of the way this battle has been fought through the 3 years? Because a lot of how wars in future may be fought, God forbid there are any, but it seems more and more inevitable that there might be wars in future as well. And how will they be fought?
Thank you, Gautam. I think at the very outset, nobody ever expected the war to last so long. 3 years plus. It's virtually impossible to have thought of. Everybody thought Ukraine, it would just be a question of cakewalk the way Ukraine was surrounded in the military operations.
And it seemed like that in the initial days.
Initial days. Absolutely. Nobody ever thought about it. But look at what has happened. Because Ukraine has been supported by almost 30 countries. The troops on ground may be Ukrainian, but the equipment, the military equipment was there from the United States and all over. And that is the reason why you found Ukraine could stand up to Russia. But Russia was not fighting Ukraine. Russia was fighting the entire 30 countries' military equipment. And everybody thought the sanctions of Russia would also collapse. That also didn't happen. Russia rather bounced back in a manner that it could withstand and be able to sustain such a long war. That's one thing. So very important is initially, yes, Russians were able to take much more than what they would have probably thought. But subsequently, the way the Ukrainian counter-offensive started, Ukrainians have lost about 20% of their area. And so obviously a large portion of, you can say, the Zaporizhia, Kherson, Kharkiv, the Kyiv that they're surrounded, they had to give it up. And the kind of fighting that was going on and now also continuously, I think the Ukrainian counter-offensive, yes, 20% of the Ukrainian land gone. Crimea, of course, they had lost in 2014. But the way anybody and everybody expected Russia to have a cakewalk, that didn't happen. Russia obviously didn't think that all of the 30 countries would be fighting against Russia. Russia bounced back. Ukrainian counteroffensive stayed on. The losses, of course, both claim to be very limited, but I know hundreds and thousands of people would have died in this war. Number one, over 6 million people from Ukraine have got displaced and they've taken refuge in various countries. So all in all, I think very important for it is, irrespective of what it is, very important. Conventional war, there to stay. Everybody says that, well, maybe a question of a few weeks and few months. No, it can be very long. So conventional war, boots on ground, extremely, extremely important. You can have the works of everything. You could have the finest of air defense. You could have the finest of tanks and the APCs and artillery and everything, aircrafts and helicopters. But at the end of it, boots on ground matter. And that is where I think both the Russians also realize that there is a lot that needs to be done. The Ukrainians obviously lost. And Zelensky became, I thought, Zelensky became like a front for some of the Western leaders, which probably left to Zelensky, he would not have. And again, as somebody would say, many would say, well, the Russians did the invasion. Well, quite a few would say Russians are provoked into it because obviously the expansion and extension of NATO, which the Russians weren't desirous of. And now we see how the Americans also, after January 20th, are insisting on a certain area. Nobody likes enemy in the backyard. That's something which you have to be very concerned about. And obviously, at the end of it, I would say, Gautam, boots on ground matter. Conventional wars are there to stay. Nuclear is only a deterrence, irrespective of whatever one might say, tactical nuclear missile, strategic nuclear missile, nothing of that can be used. They are all as a deterrent, but yes, they need to be there so that at least the thing as a deterrent, you can restrict the damage from going beyond. But, well, the Russians are there, and so are the Ukrainians. I hope, at least after 3 years of fighting, some good sense prevails and talks lead to peace. And very difficult to say that the Russians will vacate the Ukrainian land that they have occupied, because boots on ground, the Russians have the Russian-speaking area in their custody and control.
Thank you for that astute comment on nuclear weapons as well. That is another aspect. And the fact that drones play such a huge role has also been brought to stark relief in this particular war. There are projections that if the war doesn't stop, Ukraine will end up producing in the vicinity of 5 million drones in 2025. Now, let's cut to the present and talk about the future as well. Ambassador Sachin, what do you think will happen? Does everything really hinge? Because the perception is that everything hinges on what Donald Trump does, which is why you have Emmanuel Macron, the first European leader, a month after Donald Trump taking over, going down to the White House, not being received by Trump at the doorstep.
Yeah, you're very right. I think much depends upon Donald Trump, because Donald Trump was really the pivot around which everything was revolving. The whole NATO support to Ukraine, it was revolving around that. But if you permit, Gautam, very quickly, let me also make one or two additional points. Number one, Ukraine was able to take some territory in Kursk region of Russia since August last year. So far, Russia has not been able to get Ukraine to evacuate it. So I think that is very illustrative that although Russia is such a big power, but even in its own territory, it has not been able to protect itself. As far as the Ukrainian troops are concerned, I think weaponry is important, but it is troops which make all the difference. You've seen what happened in Kabul. They had whatever, 70, 80 billion dollars worth of equipment. There were no troops to fight the Taliban in 2021. They fled. And the last is in terms of the nuclear weapons that you said. You see, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in 1994 with the agreement that Russia, US, UK, etc. will ensure its territorial integrity and sovereignty. Today, if Ukraine had nuclear weapons, Russia would never have been able to invade it. Now, coming to, what is going to happen ahead, as we were talking, I think it is confusing. It is difficult to know at this moment, but the United States, Donald Trump is critical to, whatever is going to be the final outcome. And here, I think if it is able to get what it wants, meaning it sent a paper for Zelensky to sign so that, $500 billion worth of rare earth minerals would go to America. Now that, I think, Zelensky must be applauded that he stood strong, he stood his ground, and he did not sign on that deal. But still, conversation is going on, dialogue is going on. And, this might have been a maximalist position that Trump might have taken, but he moderates his position. There is some agreement between Ukraine and the United States in terms of how American companies will be able to come up and how American companies will be able to exploit and prospect for rare earth minerals. I think then Trump is also, United States is also invested in getting a ceasefire quickly. So I think the first thing we really need to do is ceasefire, and as far as territory is concerned, that will be a matter of negotiation, and Ukraine has also accepted, it has also acceded that some of the territory could stay with Russia, and that could be a matter of negotiation in future. So I think if that is there, there is also agreement that Ukraine does not join NATO, does not become a member of NATO, but there are security guarantees. There are credible security guarantees for Ukraine. And of course,
but it had credible security guarantees when it gave up nuclear weapons as well. You mentioned it yourself. What happened to that?
I think the conditions today are very different, Gautam. Conditions today are very different. And I think they will have to involve not only these 4 countries who gave, in the Budapest Accord, the guarantees, but also the United Nations. So I think the global community will have to be involved in giving these guarantees, and there will be not only for Ukraine, but also for Russia.
Provided others are brought in. Apart from right now, Trump is just dealing with Vladimir Putin. You have Macron going there now. There will be Keir Starmer there as well later, perhaps Thursday this week, to convince him to bring Ukraine and Europe on board. So in how much trouble is Europe, apart from Ukraine, in General Kulkarni at this moment?
Thank you, Gautam. I think what Ambassador Sajjana said is absolutely right. The Ukrainians have had a little bit of a success, especially Kirk, which the Russians never expected. From 400 odd square kilometers, of course, they could just recover about 120 odd square kilometers, but they're still hanging around there, and that's a very big thing. But irrespective of whatever it is, I think the very fact that Zelensky seems to have lost his high moral ground, Zelensky seems to have lost the support that he felt very strongly coming from America, because obviously billions of dollars invested by the Americans, and I would say billions of pounds also been put in by the European Union, the euros been put in by the European Union. Irrespective of all that, well, Zelensky doesn't feel very, very comfortable. His desire to join NATO, now that's what the war really started all about. It is only NATO and nothing else. What the Russian stand was that under no circumstances should Ukraine be part of NATO. Why did the war start at all 3 years back? Only for this one simple reason. Well, insistence on joining NATO, well, I don't think ever Ukraine can join NATO. Yet, guarantees 100% will be given that the Russians hereinafter will never ever attack. As regards the ground and the occupation of the land, well, that's something negotiable. It just could become like Germany of the Second World War. You will have East Ukraine, West Ukraine. You may have the East Ukraine with the Russians, the West Ukraine with the Europeans. And so it carries on maybe another 30, 40 years. The amount of losses that the Ukrainians, over $100 billion of losses. By the time they recover, God only knows it will take 15 years, 25 years, 40 years, 50 years for Ukraine to stand on its own feet again. But yet, Ukraine has lost. You lost its space. Ukraine unnecessarily went into war with Russia, which could well have been avoided. the same thing. The start point was not joining the NATO. Again, the insistence by Zelensky that I will step down if Ukraine joins NATO. Now, that kind of a guarantee, as ab initio, I don't think it's possible.
Okay.
Ukraine will never join NATO, and that is where it stands. Guarantees, yes, Russia will never ever attack Ukraine for various guarantees that the Americans or the European Union or the NATO can give to Ukraine. And of course, the reconstruction of Ukraine is very, very important. And I see nothing more than that.
Let's see what comes forth. Meanwhile, Macron has said, as he left the White House to walk back to Blair House, where he's staying, the guest residence, said the welcome from Trump was very good, very friendly, although Trump didn't come to the doorstep to receive him. And again, he said, we had the video conference in the Oval Office with the G7. That's where Zelensky said that talks are going well, where that deal on the minerals is concerned. Now, just a quick comment from you before I close this, Ambassador Sajanhar. What do you make of what Keir Starmer has been saying? Trump says that Zelensky, Ukraine has no cards, but it's Starmer who's countering him. Starmer and UK and US supposedly joined at the hip, the closest European ally that the US has ever had since the Second World War.
No, absolutely right. I think it is Britain which has been, in the past next only to the United States. You would remember that when Joe Biden was the president, he had traveled to Kiev and he had said that we are going to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. I don't think there could be any other more affirmative commitment than that. Next to that has been Keir Starmer, and now he's been even saying that he would be willing to put in, peace troops in Ukraine. So I think all of these leaders will try to convince Trump, both Macron as well as Keir Starmer, and now we have, a new government in Germany that will be taking over. They will all try to impress upon the United States and Donald Trump that they should stay together, that they should, NATO should not just dissipate like this, and transatlantic partnership should be retained, should be sustained. That is what I think they will try to impress upon Donald Trump. That is what Macron had said before he left, that you have to get peace through strength and not, what has been mentioned, peace by giving up territory or by giving up land. So I think we'll really have to wait and see what is the outcome.
I think we'll find out pretty soon, because we will have Macron and Donald Trump addressing the media as well in some time from now. That's been scheduled. I don't know if it will stay the course, because things do change. Yes, but let's see what happens. Thank you for joining us, General Kulkarni, as well as Ambassador Sajanhar, for the latest on this situation. 3 years of the conflict and the end not yet in sight.